Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome back to our Agronomy Refresh training series. As we start to look into the next couple of weeks, so today we're going to cover drift, deposition, aids, and oils. So that'll finish up adjuvants and spraying. And then we're actually going to end up moving down into yield enhancing products and so that'd be like your PGRs, biostimulants, biologicals. So Mitch Larson is actually going to do that particular segment for the next couple of weeks there, starting next week, January 30th, and then February 6th as well. I got to talk to Scott yet for talking about services and some of the stuff we're offering around that. So I'll talk to Scott and we'll make sure that that date works for him on the February 13th date. And then Jeff's got some information for us on March 6th around some of the answer plot data from the previous year, and I'll have some stuff on the 13th for the answer plot data review from last year as well. And then we'll finish up with the spring forages presentation there in the spring with Jeff Jackson. There is a little bit of a break here from March 13th, or sorry, from February 13th to March 6th, and that's due to the regional conference that we'll have during that time. So we'll give you some information on that as well. In addition, we do have an Iowa Applicators Continuing Education class coming up. This is being taught virtually on March 11th from 9 to noon. Okay, so all of your Winfield United reps will have access to the registration link. Again, this only covers Iowa, so this will not cover any other state. But if you need your continuing education class or anybody at your location needs their continuing education credits for their Iowa applicators license, have them attend this class. It'll cover 1A, 1B, 1C, 4, which would be seed treatments, and H. So anybody who's needing those credits, feel free to jump on during that time. In addition, we do have the Iowa Regional Conference coming up on February 19th and 20th. Got a lot of great topics here coming up. Brian Young's going to start us out from Purdue. He's got some really good information on the war on water hemp. How can we fight them? How can we hold them? Some interesting perspectives on See and Spray and some of that stuff. We'll go through high yield corn and soybeans. Jeff has graciously volunteered to talk to us about tillage, some of the stuff that he actually does on his own farm as well. And then we actually have a chemist coming in to talk about chemical formulations. Dustin always does a really nice job. So that'll kind of wrap up the first day. And then we have on the second day, Chad Hart coming in to talk about commodities and where he sees things going from there. Then Jeff Jackson, or the famous Jeff Jackson in this case, is going to talk on forages. Jeff Osterhaus is going to he's going to continue and come up again and talk about some of the seed industry and what's going on with that. And then we'll wrap up with Darren Mueller talking about fungicide decisions for today's crops. As part of that, he is going to go through and talk about some of the work that he's been doing around drone applications. They had a really interesting study in conjunction with Bayer, where they took and were comparing drone applications to ground rigs to aerial application and comparing some of those results. And so that's something that he's going to cover during that segment as well. So some really, really good topics. There is a cost to that training. So make sure you check with your managers to make sure that that is okay there. If you need the registration link for that, also reach out to your local Winfield United rep, but this will be a really, really good training. Also, that evening, we are offering an evening event. There'll be supper and then some games and a watching one of the sports teams. I think it's basketball. Not the greatest. I think it's I'm not the greatest with sports. I'm sorry, guys, but That I think it is basketball. The other thing, Steve Barnhart, for those of you guys that remember Steve Barnhart, he is going to come um, during the evening event of that. I tried to convince him to come on and actually present, but he did not want to do that. But he is going to come back and visit with us and have some fun that evening. So feel free to get signed up for that. It'll be a really good event. So, all right, moving into oils. So this oils market, specifically oils that we're putting in the tank, uh, this is one that has really increased in frequency in the past 3 years. Couple reasons for that. First of all, we've been fairly dry when we were making some of these applications. But I think more importantly, it's some of the tank mix combinations that we're seeing with, for example, Enlist. Especially on the soybean side, we're seeing a lot more of the MSOs being put in there just to help melt through that waxy cuticle and heat up some of those tank mixes. Okay. And so, one of the things that we talked about last week is we went through surfactants, right? And so I get people that get a little bit confused when we're talking surfactants and oils. What's the difference? What do they do? Really, an oil is strictly in there to help melt through the waxy cuticle. Okay, and so that cuticle layer, especially on a hot and dry type of situation, is usually fairly thick. And so when we get that thicker waxy cuticle, we need something to melt through that so that we can penetrate that leaf surface and actually get into the plant. Okay, now I get people that get confused with, okay, what is a non-ionic surfactant? What is a crop oil concentrate? What is a MSO, methylated seed oil? What's the difference between them? When do I use one? When do I use another? What I go back to is I go back to this analogy that I often use. And if you think about the heat level that we're using, and you think about peppers. Okay, so like a non-ionic surfactant would be like a bell pepper. Okay, so bell pepper, it's got a little bit of spice to it, not a lot. It's going to have it's going to add some heat, so that surfactant's going to add just a little bit of heat to the spray tank, but you're not going to overly heat that up. You're not going to see a lot of crop response, and honestly, sometimes it's not enough to get the weed control, but it's having other benefits for us, like mixing, like spreading that droplet out, like increasing penetration, those types of things. But it's not going to heat that spray tank up very hot. Okay. So then you have crop oil concentrate. That's the next step up. And that'd be like more like a habanero, or well, no, I would almost describe it like a jalapeno. It's got some spice, right? But it's not going to be overly spicy. So that crop oil concentrate's kind of right in the middle there, comparison to a jalapeno. When you get into a MSO, a methylated seed oil, okay, that would be more like your habanero or ghost pepper. I mean, it's getting hot, right? It's one of those that when you eat it, you feel it going in and coming back out. That would be an adequate description of an MSO. It heats things up, does a great job of increasing the amount of kill that you get with the weeds, but there is a little bit more of a risk of seeing crop response. So that would be the comparisons that I give you for the oils here. Another thing that I've been getting a lot of questions on lately is the difference between a high surfactant oil and a traditional oil. Okay. All oils have surfactant in them. And the reason why is if you've ever tried to mix oil with water, they don't mix, right? The oil floats right to the top of the tank. And what you end up with then is just globules of oil in the top. So in order to get an oil to mix with water, we have to add what's called an emulsifier. Okay, and the emulsifier really just is in there to help separate the water from the oil and allow those two to mix. Now, it's not a true suspension, or sorry, it is a true suspension. It's not a true solution where it actually dissolves into water. You're essentially taking that surfactant and you're surrounding it. Okay, you're surrounding the oil globules with that surfactant and allowing then that water to mix with that oil. So in this case, you can see like a surfactant that is in an oil or surfactant that's in water. Okay, the tail really likes it's lipophilic, so it's basically really likes oil. The head itself is hydrophilic, and so I already got a correction from Dustin, who is the chemist that's going to be the chemist who's going to be at the regional conference. He says oils concentrate or surfact or emulsifiers are not true suspensions either. So appreciate that, Dustin. And if you guys want to know more information on that, I'm sure he will talk about those differences when he's at the regional conference there. So yeah, appreciate that. Either way, so the surfactant allows that oil to mix with the water because it has that hydrophilic head and that oil-loving tail. Okay, and so it basically surrounds that and allows that to mix. Okay, now with traditional oils, we do have surfactant in traditional oils. And when you mix the traditional oil with water, this is kind of what it looks like. You got these larger globules of oil, and you got it surrounded by a whole bunch of water here. Okay, and so that surfactant with that lipophilic tail, the oil-loving tail, is surrounding that oil globule and allowing it to mix with water. Okay, this would be the traditional oil. With a high surfactant oil, same kind of concept, but now you have a bunch of these little individual oil globules, this oil emulsion. And so what we end up with all these smaller droplets of oil and all those really tiny droplets of oil, because we divided that more effectively, and we have more of these individual droplets, we actually see about a 2x rate of activity out of this. Okay, that's why with a high surfactant oil, we usually go at half of the rate of a traditional oil. Okay, so when you read a label, generally it's going to say, oh, you need 1 gallon per 100 of methylated seed oil, especially an older label that was around before the high surfactant oils came to the market. And so when you look at that, a 1 gallon per 100 rate of an oil, you would use a half a gallon per 100 rate of a high surfactant oil because it's more finely divided in the spray solution, which creates that much more surface area. In addition, because it has so much more activity, most people assume, well, God, the crop response is going to be a lot worse too. That's not really the case. Because if you more finely divide these individual globules of oil, now you don't have certain droplets with a ton of oil and other ones with hardly any. And so it's more evenly divided across that entire spray pattern, and we actually get fairly decent crop safety out of it. So most of the oils that we are selling today, like Destiny HC, like Strike Lock, like Superb, most of these are high surfactant oils. It's not that we don't have traditional oils, we do, Noble, Exuro, those type of products, but the high surfactant oils tends to be where the market has gone over the years. So just to do some comparisons, this is really what the oil is helping you do. It's helping you get better penetration into that leaf surface so that we can get better activity out of that herbicide. So here's an example with Enlist 1 and Strike Lock. Here's a good example with Superb and Clethodim. Really, it's just adding that next level of control. We talked about this last week as well with the Enlist 1 and Roundup Power Max, looking at the remaining amount on the leaf surface. By the way, this is some of the work that Dustin did. Enlist 1 and Roundup Power Max, I really think this data does a great job of showing how we get the herbicide into that leaf surface. Okay, because this is looking at the percent of 2,4-D that was remaining on the leaf surface after it was applied. We had 23% of that Enlist 1 that you applied remaining on the leaf surface. Now, some of you guys might, oh God, that's not that much, right? But let's just say it's 25%, pretty close, easy round numbers. You're applying 32 ounces of Enlist 1. 32 ounces of Enlist 1 at 25%, 8 fluid ounces of that active ingredient never made it into the leaf, right? So as we start to look at how can we improve our consistency of weed control, one of the biggest things that we have to look at is how can I use things like adjuvants, things like nozzles, all of these different things, add it together to get the most amount of that active ingredient into that plant. So, like we talked about last week, adding a water conditioner. Now we cut the amount that we left on the leaf by more than half. We went from 23% down to about 10%. That's pretty significant when it comes down to it. And by the way, if we want to make it even better, we got to add in an oil. So in this case, either crop oil or a MSO. And MSO is still going to be my lead recommendation. This data, when you start looking at 2.8 versus 4.4, not a lot of difference here. This is basically, and it's not statistical. This is basically showing that anytime we add in an oil, that's in addition to that class act, that's when we're going to get our best control. And in the end, guys, it's all about, especially with the problems that we've had with weed control, getting the right application in at the right time so that we get good weed control. Because if we don't kill those weeds the first time, it's going to be a tough road to go beyond that. And I know that, farmers are trying to save money, right? But in the end, the weeds don't care what the commodity prices are. And the thing about it is, if you look at the true cost of going back and respraying these weeds, from the application to the amount of yield that you lost from just having those weeds present during that time, to the chemicals that you're applying, you're much better off spending the money on the front side, doing your best to get the most consistent control on the front side, having the right nozzles, the right adjuvants in the tank, waiting for the right day. I know that we have a lot of acres to cover, but man, it doesn't help to go out and spray and not kill the weeds because you just have that many more acres to cover later. So all of these things need to line up in order to get the best and most consistent weed control. Okay. Now, this is dealing with non-X surfactants versus crop oils versus MSOs. This is exactly what I was talking about with my pepper analogy there, however lame that was. But you can see as we get into more adverse spray conditions, hotter, drier, thicker, waxy cuticle, methylated seed oils are the best things in those type of situations. Once we get into more of the mild, cool and wet, then I try to somewhat back down to some of those crop oils or surfactants, just depending on what you have in the spray tank mix, right? And you always, as you're starting to make these spray tank mixes, I often get, questions, oh God, I got this, and this in the tank. What can I use for adjuvants? Really, when I start to look at it, I look at the most restrictive label, and then I start to evaluate all of those as a mix. And so if you have, for example, oil's already in the tank. You might back off on the rate just a little bit of the methylated seed oil, for example. Or if you have, for example, hot and humid day, you might even back it down to a crop oil concentrate. But in the end, I don't, I know that people are concerned about crop response, but in the end, guys, oftentimes not killing the weed is worse than seeing a little bit of crop response in the field. Okay. So, rule of 150, if you add the relative humidity up and the temperature and it equals greater than 150, you probably need to back off on that oil amount. Don't take it out, back off on that oil amount, or even go down to, let's say if you're using a Destiny or a Strike Lock, maybe you go down to a Superb in that case. Okay. Another thing to consider is the right rate. So this is a good chart to talk about volume for volume versus the actual rate per acre in fluid ounces. So if you guys ever need a comparison chart, this is a really good one to do that. All right, so let's look at some individual products here. We'll start with crop oil concentrate. So top tier here would be Superb HC, has that corn sorb technology to increase the uptake of that herbicide in the spray tank. Optify COC, so that'd be kind of more of our mid tier. And then we also have a Valcheck COC as well. That would be more of your traditional crop oil concentrate. So you do have to use it at a higher rate. All right. I'm going to skip through some of these just so I can make sure to get it to everything. Methylated seed oil. So our top recommendation would be Strike Lock. Destiny's a really good option, but the nice thing about Strike Lock is it has very similar properties to Interlock, which we'll discuss here in a little bit. Now, a lot of people assume that Strike Lock is just a combination of Destiny and Interlock. That's not actually the case. Strike Lock is just a very specific methylated seed oil that has the same properties from drift and deposition aid as what Interlock does. So this is the latest addition to the lock family, and it is a really, really cool product here. So the next one is of course Destiny. Still great product, but you need to have Interlock in the tank with it. Okay. We also have a product called Optify MSO in the mid tier, and then we have Exuro, which would be your traditional Exuro or Noble would be your traditional high or just traditional oil. So you'd use it as twice the rate of the high surfactant oils. So this is just a comparison looking at what that oil is really doing in the tank for you. We really see some major differences when we get into Enlist 1 specifically. So Liberty as well. Liberty is a little bit more, well, a lot more driven by AMS and surfactant. In hot, dry conditions, you can see that oil helping with the Liberty some. But I'm going to say you're going to have really, really good luck with good rates of surfactant and AMS in most conditions. All right, moving on to drift and deposition aids. When it comes to drift and deposition aids, oftentimes I think we miss the mark because we talk so much about off-target movement. But really, when you start to look at the fate of the droplet, there's 5 different things that can happen to a droplet. Okay, the one, obviously, the most important would be we get it on target, right? 2, example, we just completely missed the target. So, and that's going to happen, right? We're going to have bare ground, and if you're putting, for example, Liberty on bare ground, it's not going to do us a lot of good. But we're broadcasting, and so we do have some that go on bare ground. The next one, ineffective droplet size. When we get very, very large droplet sizes greater than 600 microns, oftentimes, and we got slow speed photography of this, oftentimes those droplets can actually bounce off the leaf surface. And so there's a point at which you can get too big of a droplet. We can also get way too small of a droplet. Okay. Fine droplets can either blow off target or they just land on the top of the target, don't provide us with very good coverage. And really, guys, this balance between too large of droplets and too small of droplets is really, really important because of the fact that every time you cut your droplet size in half, volumetrically, you actually get 8 times as many droplets. So as we start to get smaller and smaller droplet sizes, we tend to also increase the amount of coverage that we have because you're getting 8 times as many droplets. Now, the downside to that is when we get too small of droplets, there's two different things that can happen. We can either have it move off target through wind or just blowing off target, or one thing that I think is more critical is we can actually have those really small droplets evaporate before they hit the target. Okay, and this is really clear when it comes to the evaporation rate based on the micron size. So when you start to look at this is really telling. 100 micron size droplet will evaporate within 7 seconds of leaving that nozzle. 150 micron will evaporate within 16 seconds of leaving the nozzle. And so if it's evaporating, we already discussed last week that once a droplet dries on the leaf, no more uptake occurs. Well, if it evaporates before it even hits the target, I'm not going to get very good herbicide control. Okay, so if you're seeing stuff like this out of the back of your sprayer, a lot of farmers assume, oh, God, I'm getting great coverage. But in the end, a lot of these really fine droplets that are just hanging up in the air like this are actually going to end up evaporating before they hit the target. Okay, and that's where, yeah, off-target movement is important, but in my opinion, the deposition piece and keeping consistent droplet size is even more important. Okay. Now, there's two different ways that we can, or there's two different types of drift and deposition aids. Okay. And this is some of the work that we've done up at River Falls here with the wind tunnel, and we continue to evaluate a lot of stuff. I'm really excited about some of the stuff that we got coming out of the Innovation Center, especially going forward, like with new technology. They've been looking a lot at pulse width modulation. They've also been looking quite a bit at and starting to just starting, so give us a little time here, but evaluating drone application and what, for example, rotary atomizer looks like in this. So a lot of that information still to come. Really excited to see some of that information as it comes out. But this is looking at some of the work that we've done on through our spray analyzer system, the wind tunnel, right? And one of the things that as you start to look at these graphs, and for those of you guys that are driving, it's okay, I will describe what we're looking at here. Basically, what you're looking at, this is a chart that looks at our density of distribution. So the higher the chart, the more or the more consistent that droplet size is in that range. And then as we go from left to right, we are increasing in our droplet size. So going from 40 microns all the way up to 1,000 microns. And no matter what, all of these nozzles will have this distribution curve, right? If I had a nozzle that could produce just one droplet size, heck, that's probably the only nozzle we'd ever use. But that's not the case. We have this distribution curve. So you have half of the droplets over here, half the droplets over here, and a majority of the droplets average out right here in the middle. Okay, so for example, with water, we have an average of 470 microns. Okay, so that's the average droplet size that we see here. And the span number represents the width of this curve. So in this case, it's 1.24. As we increase in span, we get more inconsistent droplet sizes. Okay, now one thing that affects our droplet size is what's in the spray tank. So for example, when we add glyphosate to the spray tank, it actually decreases, first of all, the consistency of those droplets a little bit. As you can see, our span goes up, but it also decreases droplet size. So our average micron size goes from 470 to 422. Not a huge quantity there, but that is something to keep in mind, is that as we add in some of these products, we will see a change in our droplet size. Okay. Now, again, there's two different types of drift control agents. There's the thickeners, or what we call the spray droplet modifiers. Okay, so thickeners, examples of these would be polyacrylamides or guars. They actually thicken up the spray solution, and what that does is it holds those droplet sizes together to the point where we increase the average droplet size, and it does decrease driftable fines. But you do dramatically increase the droplet size as well. So in this case, we went from 422 microns to 630 microns as an average droplet size. And so that's pretty dang significant when it comes down to it, because yeah, it's not doubling the droplet size, but you're going up by at least half. And so in that case, you would expect to have 4 times less droplets coming out of that nozzle. So your coverage is going down. Okay. Now, these types, so products that fit in this category would be like Ultralock, which would be our lead product in this category. We also have products like On Target, Corral Poly. All of those would fit into this category. Most of them were used with the dicamba adjuvants, right? Because the EPA, when they're looking at these, they really want that larger droplet size. Okay, and they do work in that scenario. The unfortunate thing is, though, coverage is sacrificed in these cases. So our general recommendation within Winfield United is that when we can, we prefer to use a spray droplet modifier. So things like, for example, Interlock, Strike Lock, Master Lock, Power Lock, AccuDrop, all of those products, instead of dramatically increasing the droplet size, they actually pull that span in a little bit more so that we get more consistent droplet size. Okay, so here you can see it compared to Roundup Power Max, makes more consistent droplet size and less driftable fines. And it does it without dramatically increasing the droplet size. So it went from 422 to 465, basically right back to what we were with water. Okay. In addition, one thing you notice is we actually decreased the span, or the variability in those droplets, to the point where we get very consistent droplet sizes. Okay, so that's looking at the graph here. You can see it really well, though, when you take a look at this slow motion video. Okay, so here's water alone. Here's what happens when we add glyphosate or some of these herbicides into the spray tank. Liberty will do the same thing. You actually get a little bit more driftable fines. Interlock, you can really see the consistency of the droplet size coming out of this nozzle. Here's that polymer. Yeah, it thickens that spray solution up. Yeah, it takes those droplet sizes, those small droplets out, but you get a lot of large droplets coming out of that nozzle. Okay. All right, so we won't spend a lot of time on thickeners, mainly because, dicamba Unfortunately, we do not have an over-the-top label or even a pre-label for dicamba on soybeans. But this, you can see what that thickener, in this case on target, is doing for this TTI nozzle. Okay. And one of the things that I will say with a TTI nozzle, the on target did work quite a bit better with the TTI nozzle as compared to an interlock with that. Still got some benefit, but the on target did work quite a bit better. And so here you can just see some of the work that we did with on target and Ingenia or Extendamax here. Okay. One of the things that we really worked at, because on target had some issues with usability. Guars and polyacrylamides in general are very thick products. And so one of the things we really looked at is, could we improve upon that technology? And unfortunately, Ultralock came out a little bit too late to be utilized across a lot of different applications. But if you are looking for a thickener type product that has interlock type qualities to it, Ultralock is a very, very good product in that classification. The other thing that's really neat about it is it doesn't, it handles a lot better than those thickeners. So for example, this is a comparison of how quickly it pours out of a jar. So Ultralock was within 15 seconds, or on target took a total of 50 seconds to drop out of that jar. So in addition, we do get better overall better droplet size compared to the on target. So because of the fact that it's got more of those interlock type properties to it, we did get more coverage with that, and more percent coverage and as a total, and more droplets out of that particular application there. So you can see the coverage that we got on this spray card. All right. Where I want to spend the rest of our time is on spray droplet modifiers. And spray droplet modifiers are by far the way that I would recommend going with drift and deposition aids, okay? Because it just gives us more consistent droplet sizes coming out of the nozzle here. So here's our herbicide alone. Here's our herbicide plus interlock. And consistency is key. And, you know, one of the things, we did a segment on drones back in October, if you didn't, or November. If you didn't get a chance to catch that, I can send you out the recording at any time. But one of the things, you know, as we start to look at drone technology, especially with that prop wash, the most important thing, in my opinion, when it comes to getting good application out of a drone is making sure that we have consistent droplet sizes. So an interlock, a master lock, those type of products are going to give us the most consistent droplet sizes coming out of that drone, and we're going to get better overall spray pattern coming out of that drone as well. And it's something that we're still working on and still evaluating, but it really should be interesting to see where some of these new technologies start going, especially with drones, and seeing what adjuvants work best in those situations. Right now, if I had to put my money on it, interlock and master lock are still our best bet. But you know, we'll continue to evaluate. Just like I said, just working on getting that in the wind tunnel now. It was challenging, and I got to give kudos to Stephen Fredericks up at the Innovation Center. One of the things that's really challenging with a regular nozzle, it just throws its spray in one direction, right? Whereas these rotary atomizers, it's just spraying every which way, right? Because it comes out at a 360 degrees around that nozzle. And so one of the things that they're trying to figure out is, how do we truly analyze this spray when it's coming out at that 360 degrees around that nozzle. And so that's one thing. It'd be really interesting to see what they find in the tunnel or in the wind tunnel, because with we've seen some stuff out in the field, but as one of our researchers, Ryan Edwards, describes it, I think he described it as absolute chaos. If he's on today, maybe he'll pop that into the chart there or into the chat there. But I think he described a rotary atomizer as absolute chaos when it comes out of that nozzle. And so that's one thing that, as we start to look at that in the wind tunnel, it'll be interesting to see what we are seeing coming out of something like a rotary atomizer. So with drift and deposition aids, guys, one of the things, and this is why I don't necessarily want us to talk strictly about drift when it comes to drift and deposition aids, is because no matter what speed you're going across that field, you're going to have wind moving in that boom because you're not applying that stagnantly. So this is a good example from the wind tunnel, looking at a wind coming across that boom at 10 miles per hour. And you can see all these individual droplets just hanging up in that spray solution. Okay, and this is where, if you're on the inside of the field, oh, well, I don't have to worry about off-target movement in that case. That's fine. But if we put in interlock, look at how we can get those finer droplets taken out of that, and you don't get all that hanging up. These droplets are going to make it to the canopy, whereas a lot of these over here on the left probably won't. So it's really important that we have some sort of drift and deposition aid in there to get more consistency in that droplet size so that we don't evaporate that spray solution. Again, 100 micron size droplet will evaporate within 7 seconds of leaving the nozzle. And that active ingredient that was in that droplet is no longer effective. So how can I get more consistent control? By making sure that we have the right adjuvants in the spray tank. So here's a good example with Enlist 1 and Liberty. By the way, Enlist 1 by itself actually does a fairly effective job at controlling driftable fines. And so if Enlist 1 is the only thing that is in that spray tank, realistically, interlock's probably not going to add a lot of benefit. But when you start adding things like glyphosate or Liberty, for example, or Outlook, a lot of these different types of spray tank mixes, we start to see that driftable fines creep up, and that's where that interlock really does a nice job of helping us control that. So this is just looking at Enlist 1 with a bunch of different tank mixes here. And in most cases, we're cutting the amount of driftable fines down in half. So this is just looking at overall coverage that we're getting. So here's water alone. Here's Class Act plus interlock. And this is at 10 gallons per acre. Here's at 20 gallons per acre. The biggest thing, guys, with Master Lock, with interlock, with any of these, is keeping that droplet wet enough, long enough down into that canopy. So here's a good comparison with Master Lock versus water alone. And one of the things that I'll really point out here is watch how long it takes for all these small fines to actually settle down in this canopy on the left here with water. See all these really, here, I'll stop it right there. Look at all of these really, really small droplets that are still hanging up in that air. As compared to the Master Lock, you're not seeing any. That's the importance of managing that droplet size, because if you have those small droplets, a lot of those are going to end up evaporating before they hit the target. okay? And in the end, we're really just looking for better coverage. So here's Liberty alone versus glufosinate plus Liberty. And you can see the added amount of coverage that you get, okay? Now, some other things. I want to dispel this myth here. And we were guilty of this somewhat as well. One of the things, so gradual N, also known in the past as SRN25B, we have a gradual N25B. Another product would be Coron, right? Those products in the past, people have claimed that because we had those in the spray tank at a gallon per acre, for example, that I can increase my canopy penetration with that. There is some truth to that. This is a cool demonstration. I believe Darren Roberts, one of my former counterparts, did this a couple years back, looking at gradual N, and this is the 25B version, compared to water compared to Master Lock. And one thing you'll notice is that we did, in fact, get better canopy penetration with gradual N. 100% accurate. The reason why is because you have now, instead of water, which is a little over 8 pounds weight per gallon, now you have gradual N, which is closer to 11 pounds per gallon. It's a heavier product. It will fall farther. Okay, and you can see that we did increase the penetration of the canopy. The difference, though, guys, is gradual N, Coron, SRN25B, will not affect droplet size. And because of that, yes, we get better canopy penetration, but we do not get better coverage. And you can see that here in the totals in the bottom. There was no difference between water and gradual N. However, with Master Lock, we got about 12% additional coverage. So 12% more of your active ingredient, 12% more of that fungicide down in that canopy than we did with the gradual N or water. So regardless if you want to use a SRN or slow release nitrogen type of product, it's not, you still need Master Lock in the tank. So other thing with, gradual N, those types of products, they can be a nice little shot of nitrogen. Okay, I would personally argue that the boron's probably the more significant quantity of that yield equation, but you can add a few bushels per acre on with a nitrogen product. I usually lean more into like a Maxin ZMB Plus, because I think the manganese and the boron and the zinc in that is going to provide me more of a consistent response as compared to the gradual N. If you want if you want more nitrogen, my recommendation is put a little bit more in on the side dress. So not saying that gradual N, you can't bridge some gaps, but if anything, I would rather see that product on at like an R3 to help just finish the filling process, rather than right at tassel when I'm more looking at manganese and boron as being really important. Okay. Penetration, you can see that this is a whole different study, very similar results here. In the end, we're at roughly about 68% coverage here versus about 75% coverage here on the right. And the real thing that this comes down to is if I can get more of the fungicide down into the canopy and not lose it, I can actually quantify that in a yield response. So this is looking at 5 years worth of data here. On average, over this 5-year period, we average 5.7 bushels by having Master Lock in the tank versus the fungicide alone. Okay, and we've seen this over and over and over again. Here's a comparison from 2019 that we did, looking at with and without master lock. I brought this one up because I often get questions, well, you know, if it's at V10 or earlier application, I really don't need the master lock because I'm going out there with 20 gallons per acre. I don't need that, right? That was not the case. In fact, actually at the V10 time period, we actually ended up with 7 bushels as compared to the R1 time period in this particular study. So pretty significant. In addition, of course, master lock will not cause arrested ear. So here's that lock family. And so you can see all the different products that fit into the lock canopy, from interlock to master lock to power lock, strike lock, and ultra lock. Okay. Final thing on the spraying is around mixing. Of course, you always want to make sure that things are going to mix properly because you don't want this stuff in your spray tank. Really, when it comes down to it, if you're not comfortable or if you don't know whether something's going to mix, I always recommend doing a jar test. The reason why is you're always going to end up doing the jar test anyway. It's just the size of jar that's going to make a difference. Is it going to be a 1,200 gallon size jar, or is it going to be a quart size jar? Right? And which one's easier to clean out? So when it comes down to it, and this is where our formulation chemist, because Dustin's on today, can help me out if I get anything wrong here. But I usually go back to the Wales and Dales method for these comparisons here. And by the way, if you guys, you can talk to your local Winfield United rep, but we do have, Mitch and I worked pretty hard on putting together this product guide. It has in it on page, oh, we didn't number the pages. That's something we need to do next year. This page right here actually has some common tank mixes and where we would put things in. But in general, Wales and Dales, we're always going to be at our wetter bubble powders, our water dispersible granules, our suspension concentrates, those types of things in first. Agitation, I put mild in there because a lot of people actually over agitate some of these chemistries, and you can actually cause issues with compatibility just by over agitating. Okay, so you don't want to be too aggressive, but we do want to have some agitation there. Then we're going to add in our liquids, our emulsifiable concentrates, so our oils, and then we're going to add in our surfactants and drift control agents here. Now, again, if you're having issues with surfactants, mixing, I would move that surfactant up towards the beginning there. Okay, some other watch outs. When you start to look at things like ammonium thiosulfate. Ammonium thiosulfate in general is very difficult to mix with, okay? My recommendation, I like to pre-slurry whatever chemical that I'm putting in. And so I usually do 2x the rate of water. So for example, if I'm doing, if I'm doing, for example, let's say something that's going in a quart per acre, I may pre-slurry that with 2 quarts per acre of water, then add that into the 32. The last thing that needs to go into the tank is that ATS. Always, always, always put the ammonium thiosulfate in last. That's key. And even with that, we can still have some issues. If you're having issues specifically with fertilizer, complete compatibility, I'd always have some of that on hand. Complete compatibility is a great product to help overcome some of those issues. Dustin added in, we can move the surfactants up. Do not move the oils or drift control agents up in this mixing order, just the surfactants. Okay, so preference, Optify NIS. We can move those things up. Don't move your Superb, your Destinies, your Strike Locks, your Interlocks. All of those things, even Master Lock, those need to go in last. Okay, we covered this last. Just quick discussion here. Helix GT, Acuron GT, Resicor, some of these somewhat difficult to mix with products. Just make sure that we're adding plenty of water. If you are having troubles, add in that extra quart per 100 of preference up front. That will help you. Specifically with liquid atrazine, that tends to be where we see the most problems with that. So, all right. Last thing is on sprayer cleanout. The biggest thing, guys, and this won't take too long, make sure that you are pulling those screens out. Another comment that I will have, if you get a new John Deere sprayer with Exact Apply, pull the screens out of them and replace them. Okay, most of the screens are going to be coming, the screen size is either going to be an 80 mesh or a 100 mesh screen. Actually, this is true even without Exact Apply. Pull those screens out, okay? Because any of our SC formulations from Helix, Atrazine, Resicor, Maverick, any of those chemistries will state right on the label, do not use any finer screen than a 50 mesh screen. Okay, and that's your holes per square inch, right? So bigger number, the finer the screen. And so pull those 80 mesh screens or the 100 mesh screens out and put 50 mesh screens in there. You're going to avoid a lot of buildup issues. Okay, and that can really save you a lot of time. Sometimes you'll be completely fine, and on other days you'll get, poor water quality, something will change, and all of a sudden you're going to get a bunch of sediment. So just pull those screens out, put 50 mesh screens in. Okay, so check your filters. I usually always pull my filters first, get those rinsed out. Check your boom ends, just make sure everything is flushed out. Check those end caps and some of the places where you can get chemistry buildup. I've had many times where a secondary nozzle like this for high flow nitrogen rates, this often is where chemistry can build up, and a lot of times that it comes out later in the season on soybeans. Okay. Also, always check the actual tanks themselves to make sure you get that fully clean and go through that triple rinse process. Okay, so after you got all of the filters and everything kind of cleaned out, add water in, get that flushed out. Okay, then you're going to use those tank rinsing nozzles in there as well. Then we're going to add in our tank cleaner. And guys, it's never, if you have the time, it's never a bad idea to let that sit overnight, spray that out, and then put water back in and make sure that we're getting everything out of that spray tank. Some general sprayer hygiene. If you can flush the line out at the end of the day and rinse it out with tank or rinse it out with water or tank cleaner, you're going to be miles ahead. Okay, because here's the thing, the majority of the calls that I get of issues, for example, like this, it's not in the tank, it's in the lines. And so especially if you're using some of the new either a new ag chem machine, a Fendt, John Deere has it on their sprayer. I think even some of the case sprayers are now coming with these recirculating booms. If you can pump all of that stuff back into the tank and add in some tank cleaner into that line overnight, it's really going to help keep that clean and prevent some of that buildup from occurring. So With that, I really appreciate you guys jumping on. Again, next week we will start with Mitch Larson. And for anybody that needs CCA credit, go ahead and stick on the line here and I'll get that up here very quickly. Thanks for coming.